one of the biggest changes to pet food labeling in, say, probably 40 years. And so trying to come to a consensus between industry and regulators, it's always, I don't want to call it a challenge. I don't think that's the right word, but you've got to make compromises here and there. And sometimes I think, regulators may want one thing and industry wants another, and you find some nice middle ground to make some of those changes, and hopefully end up with what I think we ended up with a product that is that achieves the intended goal. It's more transparent, more clear, and it works for everyone.
Hi, and welcome to the Pet Food Science podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm Jan Widolski. I'm your host to bring you the latest insights and discussions in the pet food science industry. So get ready to expand your knowledge, and today I'm really welcoming Austin Therrell, who is the Executive Director of the Association of the American Feed Control Officials. And he's going to talk to us a little bit or try to bring us the newest information about labeling and so on. So Austin, welcome. It's really a pleasure to welcome you here. Maybe you give us some time to introduce yourself.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Jan. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. And my name is Austin Therrell. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and have been in this role for almost 2 years. And for those that are maybe not familiar, AAFCO is we're a nonprofit association that is made up of our members are the regulators, both state and federal regulators in the U.S. That serve in departments of agriculture or land grant universities, and they are charged by their state law to regulate the sale of all commercial feed and animal drug remedies. So that's who we represent. Prior to this role, I worked for the South Carolina Department of Agriculture, managing our animal feed regulatory program for about 8 years. And throughout that process, had the opportunity to serve on the board of directors for AAFCO, and to chair a couple different AAFCO committees, and participate on various work groups throughout the years. So I've got quite a bit of AAFCO experience, I guess, but always still continuing to learn something new every day, and the importance of what the association, I think, brings to the table in the space of feed and pet food.
That's great. I mean, just maybe like a quick step back, because we have a lot of a very wide audience, all the way from specialists, nutritionists, regulatory, but also like a lot of grad students. So how did you end up in this role? What is your completely background education-wise? And so how was your career path that you really ended up before you even started in the agriculture business?
Yeah, I went to Clemson University, and majored in animal veterinary science. And like a lot of people, probably I had the intention to go on to vet school at one point during that journey, and ended up getting sidetracked, and felt like I was a little more interested in feed and nutrition. And so I graduated with an animal science degree and a minor in business administration, but went to work briefly in the pet food industry in the southeastern part of the United States, and then transitioned to state government with the South Carolina Department of Agriculture from that. So animal science background, worked in the feed industry in the southeast, and then kind of led me along the road here to AAFCO today.
So that's exciting.
Leading pet food manufacturers, renderers, and ingredient suppliers recognize that Kemin is assurance. Every day they deliver specialized expertise, innovative products, and unrivaled support through the pet food and rendering value chain. From oxidation control and food safety to palatability and nutrition, all the way through a suite of tailored services that allow you to feel supported from start to finish to ensure you're getting the most from Kemin ingredients. That's why every step of the way, Kemin Nutrissurance is your partner in pet food and rendering ingredients.
So we know there's going to be a lot of changes, right, in the labeling system. Can you tell us a little bit what is the old system, what's the new system, why is there need for a new system?
Yeah, so that's it's a big project. Jan, we're calling Pet Food Label Modernization. That the discussion and the work around I'm going to say PFLM for short is what we refer to it as, has been going on since 2015. So if you kind of go back in time a little bit, the association, we have representatives from the feed industry, we have regulators, and then we also have some consumer advocates within the group. And so we do put out, a lot of information for consumers. And we were hearing at the time there was a need or a desire for more transparency in pet food labeling, a desire maybe from a consumer standpoint that for pet food labels to more closely resemble human food labeling. And so we decided to take that charge to our pet food committee and and basically ask them to say, hey, come up with some ideas to modernize pet food labeling that will enhance in transparency and expand safety. So that was what we handed to them. That was in 2015. So that was an 8-year project. Throughout that time, our pet food committee, kind of subdivided that work into different categories, and we did a lot of work with consumer testing and to make sure we were tracking with the changes that were being made, and ultimately that work product came together last fall, in the fall of 2023, where we finally accepted all of those changes for pet food label modernization.
Can you tell us a little bit the Pet Food Committee? Who are the representatives, or which groups are on the committee?
So we have it's one of our larger committees. The AAFCO Pet Food Committee is currently chaired by it's co-chaired by Lizette Beckman from the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and then also an AAFCO Life member, being Stan Cook, who's retired from the Missouri Department of Agriculture. That committee is also made up of various other state representatives and regulators, as well as advisors from the Pet Food Institute, from the American Feed Industry Association, National Grain and Feed Association, North America and Renders Association, and so on. So I could go down the list and name them, but there's it's a diverse group that has they represent interests from various different parts of the pet food industry and the ingredient industry as well.
What do you think was, from your experience, the biggest challenges to move forward over these 8 years?
Well, there's always with a project this big. This is one of the biggest changes to pet food labeling in, say, probably 40 years, and so trying to come to a consensus between industry and regulators, it's always, I don't want to call it a challenge. I don't think that's the right word, but you've got to make compromises here and there, and sometimes I think regulators may want one thing and industry wants another, and you find some nice middle ground to make some of those changes, and hopefully end up with what I think we ended up with a product that is that achieves the intended goal. It's more transparent, more clear, and it works for everyone.
So, what are the major changes? You said the biggest change since the last 40 years. So, what are the real major changes that we need to be prepared for?
So yeah, so there's quite a few changes. I'll touch base on some of the, I'll call the bigger ones, I think, that'll be most prominently noticed by the industry, and that is the new requirement for an intended use and nutritional adequacy statement. So now that is going to be required to be on the bottom 30% of the principal display panel. So previously, that looked like the statement on the front of the label. It said dog food or cat food. Now, with the new change, that language is going to be a little bit more defined, and it's got to incorporate, again, that the intended use and the nutritional aspect of the product. So, for example, complete dog food or cat treat or dog food mixer. Those would be some examples, and that language would need, that statement would clearly be defined again on that the bottom 30% of the principal display panel. So that's one big change that we feel like that will help consumers clearly see, when they're looking on the shelf of that product, exactly what the product's intended to do when they purchase it. The other one is the change from what was previously the guaranteed analysis to what is now we're calling a pet food nutrition facts box. And so it's a nutrition facts box that it looks very similar to what you would see on a human food label. And that nutrition facts box is now going to contain a new, what we're calling a familiar household unit. It has all the information in one concise place on the label. Familiar household unit, that calories per that familiar household unit, calories from protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And then there's also a couple new guarantees that would be required in that pet nutrition facts box as well. One being, the calculation for total carbohydrates, and then a new replacement from crude fiber to dietary fiber. We also left some room in the regulations to voluntarily make a dietary starch or a sugars guarantee as well. But those are kind of I think the big changes with the pet nutrition facts box. And so again, you're taking some of those nutritional guarantees and putting them in one place in a nicely formatted nutrition facts box for the consumer. Um, we can go back and touch on any of these if you'd like, but I'll also say I think one of the kind of the two other large changes within pet food label modernization that I think will be prominent are some allowances we've made within the ingredient statement area. So we are allowing vitamins and minerals to be grouped together in parentheses. So if there was a premix added, you could a firm could state vitamins, and then in parentheses list out those vitamins side by side. Same with minerals, so you can group them together. We also created some allowances to list common foods within the ingredient statement. So blueberries or broccoli or those type of things that they're commonly or common food, and they're recognized in that way. And then we also created some allowances for organic within the ingredient statement. And so previously that may have been looked at by some state regulators as a reference to quality or grade. But now, as long as it's in line with the USDA National Organic Program, it's kind of codified within the regulations, the model regulations that states would accept that. So and then the last one, I think, last big change, we came up with some icons that for safe handling and storage instructions. So and these are, again, they're voluntary. They can be used by a manufacturer on the label if a manufacturer chooses to, but things like clean and wash your hands, or separate from human food, or store in a clean dry place. Those type of safe handling or storage icons, we have created images both in color and black and white for firms to use in printing and graphic artwork if they choose to use that. So all big changes, and overall, when you combine them together with some of the other minor ones, pet food labels, I think over the next few years will be starting to look a lot different.
So what is the timeline of introducing those changes? Are they going to already enrolling, and until when companies do they have to adhere to those new guidelines?
So AAFCO, that was a point of a lot of debate as well, on how quickly some of these changes can be made. Jan, one of the things that we realize is that the pet food industry is very large, and some of these changes they're not easily made overnight. There's a lot of investment and time and money into packaging changes and so on. So we wanted to be respectful in working with the industry, and so we really posed the question back to the pet food industry is to say, hey, how long do you need to make these changes? And ultimately, we ended up on a 6-year enforcement discretion recommendation. So that is what we are conveying to AAFCO members, state regulators, and saying, hey, we would over the next 6 years, and that timeline started with the publication of the 2024 AAFCO official publication earlier this year.
Okay.
6 years from that timeline, our expectation is that everyone would be in full compliance, and so that gives our members time to make legislative changes within their state if they need to, and then that gives industry time to redo graphic artwork and make packaging changes as well.
So are already do you see when you go in a store, some more companies already changed? Do you think when you expect the first labels to appear, those changed ones?
I'm interested in that. I every time I go to the store, I kind of look on the shelves to see if I notice any changes. But I think that certainly there will be some firms in the market that make the changes sooner than others. And I think that'll be a good thing. It'll make some of those packages maybe stand out on the shelf before others. So.
So what can companies kind of what is your recommendation for pet food companies to implement those changes? The guidelines pretty clear, or do they need some consulting advices, or how would you recommend they approach that problem?
So I'll plug a couple resources here that I think are helpful. Within the last year, we have conducted several webinars and workshops in conjunction with some of the meetings that we hold each year to go through some of these changes and to walk kind of in detail through some of the ones that need to be made. And we'll continue to do that. We're also working on some video resources that will be coming out later this year. And the big one that we also did is we completely revised and updated what we also produced what we call a pet food labeling guide. And so that takes the information that's contained in the model pet food regulations, and it kind of does a little bit of a deep dive into them and provides some real world examples and common language that really I think is helpful as people walk through the changes. And so everyone can find that on our website. If you go to resources and guides and manuals, the new revised AAFCO pet food labeling guide will be available for purchase there.
Are some of those changes technically very challenging? I think maybe I'll come back to the fiber again. I'm not also a nutrition expert in depth, but I heard that this new fiber regulation that's going to require some additional testing. Is this correct? So can you expand this a little bit?
Yeah, that is correct, and it's a new methodology compared to what a lab would commonly run for crude fiber. However, from our discussions just with our state member laboratories, it's not a huge change, but it is. There's various different pieces of equipment out there that can run dietary fiber. One of the questions that we've gotten commonly is which method do we recommend? And I can share that from our discussions, we are telling people that AOAC 991.43 it would be the appropriate dietary fiber method to run for that guarantee. But there's certainly that's not set in stone, and there's others out there. So from a technical aspect, laboratories may need to get some new equipment. They're probably going to need time to get that equipment online and training for analysts to do, and we realize that, and that takes I think into account that 6-year enforcement discretion recommendation as well.
But my understanding that fiber is something that is really becoming more and more recognized as a very important health component. So I think that's probably very welcome by nutritionists to have more accurate fiber calculations. So I think that's really probably a welcome change. What other things you think was kind of like new other analysis that would have to be implemented, or you think most other stuff is mostly changing the labeling, or where you see potential hurdles that may take additional time to implement for some companies?
I think the big holdups, and I'm just kind of hypothesizing here, but I think the formatting changes and making sure how firms want to fit all the new information together on the label is going to be the biggest bottleneck, if you will. I think from a technical standpoint, other than dietary fiber, I don't think that there's a ton more there that should delay anything. There probably is a little bit of a learning curve on some of those firms that want to run dietary starch methods or sugar methods as well. But again, those guarantees are voluntary and certainly wouldn't be required to immediately to go to market.
Just very out of curiosity, going one step back, you meant household recognizable units, correct? So what is that example? I was just curious what that is.
Yeah, familiar household unit. So that could be a standard 8-ounce measuring cup or something similar. And so for when it comes to feeding directions and getting that calorie content per the familiar household unit, we want to require that on the label so people know it's an 8-ounce measuring cup, or this is how many grams would be required in that size. So again, I think when we come back to transparency, it's letting people know that here's what our feeding directions are based off of, and here's the measuring unit that we're specifying on the label.
Okay, but that also means that there's discretion for companies to use units they prefer, or is going to be like a standardized.
No, it's a little bit open to for companies to use different size familiar household units. So it doesn't specify that it needs to be. I'm just using an 8 ounce measuring cup as an example because I think it's a pretty common one. But it certainly could be different if a company chooses to use so, as long as it's consistent with the information on the rest of the label.
Okay. Any other things that you think could be really, long term? Do you think this is going to be the most important change, or can you see also a vision beyond that that you are kind of already eyeing, but it's going to take even more time to implement? Or I'm sure there was discussion about things that would be ideal to implement, yet you decided maybe it's too early or too challenging.
Well, outside of pet food label modernization, I can kind of share two other topics that I think would probably be relevant to the audience here of this podcast, and that's kind of the work that our association is doing around copper.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
think that anyone involved in pet food these days knows that copper's a little bit of a controversial subject, and it certainly is the case within the association as well. Um, this stems back to 2021. There was a JAVMA article that was posted about copper and dog food, and we took that article seriously. And as an association, that Jan, that's one of the things we do.
Mhm.
We have a process in place where when items come to light, or when people bring them to our attention, we convene an expert panel of veterinary nutritionists and representatives from across the industry, and we review new scientific literature. And so going back to 2021, that's what we did with copper. Ultimately, that expert panel recommended back to the association that there wasn't enough data out there to support establishing a safe upper limit for copper. But they also made some follow up recommendations to maybe to the association to look into potentially um, you know re- uh, creating some language around what I'm a voluntary controlled copper claim. And so I think we actually, as this podcast is being recorded, the AAFCO Pet Food Committee is meeting later this afternoon to vote on that recommendation. And so your audience, I'm sure by the time this airs, they can go to our website and see what that decision is going to be. But ultimately, the controlled copper claim criteria is for if someone wants to make that claim on a label, completely voluntary.
Okay.
That would mean that the product would contain a maximum of no more than 15 milligrams of copper per kilogram on a dry matter basis, and then no more than 3.75 milligrams of copper on for 1,000 kcals of metabolizable energy. So that's kind of and then it would also require that maximum copper guarantee on the label. That is that's what the committee is currently working on. We accepted some public comments from veterinarians, from the industry, and consumer groups as well, earlier this spring through March, and we've had quite a bit of discussion. So it'll be interesting to see the result of that vote, and I think that'll certainly be applicable to manufacturers over the next few years, depending on what they decide.
So thank you so much, Austin, because I think it's really very interesting that especially in the internal medicine, liver disease sections, there's always almost every conference the discussion about the role of copper in the diet, and there's really no consensus. So does it really mean also on your panels there is also no clear consensus? Correct? At the moment, it's all voluntarily for some companies to be able to do that. Correct?
Yeah, I would say that there is consensus on the fact that there's not enough data out at the moment to establish that safe upper limit for copper. However, when it comes to whether or not we should include voluntary language for a controlled copper claim, that's where it gets there. I'd say there's not much of a consensus there. I've heard and I've reviewed the public comments that were received this spring, and there's opinions all across the board on whether or not that language is appropriate. So it'll be interesting to see, and to listen in on those deliberations. But from the standpoint of the safe upper limit, there is good consensus there, and we're continuing to look at literature and new findings that come out if new data comes about.
And you also mentioned before that you have a second topic that maybe long term is of interest to the pet food industry.
Yeah, I think the second topic would be of interest is just the work that we're doing around the AAFCO nutrient profiles. I think that your audience is probably familiar with the NRC requirements from back in the day, and then how kind of the AAFCO dog and cat food nutrient profiles built on that, and became slightly different. But we're continuing to want to keep those nutrient profiles up to date with current science. And so recently, the AAFCO Board of Directors has charged the Pet Food Committee to look into a more routine process to look at new scientific advancements in nutrition, and to convene additional expert panels to look at those AAFCO dog and cat food nutrient profiles. So we want to continue to build on that, and to make changes if needed. And so there's a lot of ongoing work in that space, just to make sure that the profiles that we're promoting and requiring are as up to date as they can be.
It's time for our famous three. For more than 20 years, BioOrigin manufactures high-quality yeast-based ingredients through a sustainable biotechnological process, guaranteeing full traceability from the crop to the bowl. Through specialization in the fermentation process, BioOrigin brings the right solution for specific nutritional, palatability, and health appeals, such as gut health, immune system, skin health, weight control, and more. BioOrigin's products are natural origin, non-GMO, and certified sustainable by Bonsucro. BioOrigin is your partner for high-quality, yeast-based ingredients to add value to pet foods worldwide. Learn more at bioorigin.net.
That's great. So we're kind of at the end of our podcast. So usually we always ask I'm also supposed to ask a question that is a little bit out of the box, right? So not necessarily what you do, but I see a lot of passion, in your job here and so on. So how do you think for like our audience, especially younger member, right? In order to be successful, to be like driven, and maybe be able to at one point change the field, do you think is the recommendation of you? What is our really attitudes?
That's a great question. I think it sounds a little bit cliche, but to always say, to find something that you're passionate about, and go to work doing that, and you won't ever feel like you're working, it's a very true statement. I've had animals and been around animals for my entire life. When I went to school, I knew I wanted to go into animal science, and I never wavered there. I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I would encourage anyone out there, that's pursuing this or interested in making changes to get involved, find out where you're passionate at, and volunteer, and put your name out there and make connections, because it'll you never know where it might lead you, and it's certainly you won't feel like you're working as you're doing that. So.
That's good. Animal science has a lot of possibilities, right? Perfect. Thank you so much. So there was our podcast with Austin Therrell about the new pet food labeling. So that concludes another episode of the Pet Food Science Podcast presented by Wisenetics. Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to also be updated on future episodes. And until next time, this is Jan Sudolski in the Pet Food Science Podcast. Bye-bye.